Hey there, curious minds, and welcome back to the deep dive. You've sent us an incredible stack of sources this week, everything from live updates, expert analysis, global reactions, all focused on, well, arguably the most significant geopolitical event of the weekend. Today, we're taking a deep dive into those recent U.S. strikes on Iran. Our mission, like always, is to cut through the noise, pull out those crucial nuggets of knowledge, and really help you understand what's actually happening. Okay, let's unpack this.
Absolutely. And the sources you sent, they lay out the specifics of the strikes themselves, the immediate aftermath, and that wide range of reactions from around the globe. And importantly, the potential economic reverberations, too. Like you said, this isn't about taking sides. It's about understanding the different perspectives, the implications, just based on the material you've shared with us.
Okay, so let's start with the details of the strikes themselves. What happened when? Our sources say Saturday, June 22, 2025, President Trump announced the U.S. had struck 3 nuclear sites in Iran. He called it a spectacular military success. And CNN apparently dubbed the Operation Midnight Hammer. It involved, what, over 125 aircraft? B-2 bombers used as decoys, even?
That's right. And beyond those decoys, the sources describe a very targeted strike. You had other B-2s dropping massive ordnance penetrators, as the bunker busters on Fordow and Natanz. And then from the sea, Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from a U.S. Navy sub hitting the Isfahan site. Using those bunker busters specifically, well, that tells you they were going after deep, hardened targets, things designed to survive normal attacks. It really points to a strategic effort to hit vital, protected stuff.
What's interesting, looking at the sources, is that this decision came after days of very public deliberation by President Trump. A senior administration official noted he gave the final go-ahead on Saturday to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. And we also learned that diplomatic efforts, led by Steve Witkoff, the special envoy, they'd been going on all week. But it seems officials increasingly felt Iran just wasn't going to make a deal. Is that kind of public lead-up normal for something this big? What do you think that signals?
That is fascinating, isn't it? Public deliberation like that for such a major military action, it's less common, definitely. It could signal a few things, maybe a last-ditch push for diplomacy, or perhaps even, a deliberate signal of intent, trying to force Iran's hand somehow. Either way, it really underscores the tension behind the scenes. And while the U.S. was hitting Iran's nuclear program, we also learned the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, said they struck, quote, dozens of military sites in Iran on the same day, Sunday, June 22nd.
Right, so a simultaneous or pretty close to simultaneous operation there. What kind of sites did the IDF go after?
Well, their targets, according to the IDF statements in our sources, included things like missile and drone storage, missile launchers, even air defense battery production sites. They were quite specific about 30 Israeli Air Force jets, over 60 munitions used. They mentioned hitting the Imam Hussein Strategic Missile Command Center near Yazd. That's apparently where they stored long-range Karamshar missiles, plus launchers in Isfahan, Bushehr, Avaz, and other military sites involved in making air defense batteries, and a UAV command center. So yeah, a much broader target set than just the nuclear facilities.
Okay, so moving from the air operation to the actual impact on the ground, satellite imagery gave us that first kind of visual sense of the damage. What did those pictures show?
Yeah, the Maxar Technologies images, the ones CNN analyzed, they painted a pretty stark picture. At Isfahan, which is Iran's biggest nuclear complex, there was extensive new damage, at least 18 buildings destroyed or partly destroyed. The whole site looked blackened, lots of rubble. And consistent with using those bunker busters, the images of Natanz showed 2 new craters about 5.5 and 3.2 meters across right above the underground parts of the complex. And similarly at Fordow, the images showed at least 6 big craters from those kinds of munitions. It suggests, pretty precise targeting of those deeply buried facilities.
And the IAEA, the UN's nuclear watchdog, they weighed in too. Rafael Grossi, the chief, confirmed craters at Fordow hit buildings at Isfahan, including some linked to uranium conversion. Looked like entrances to tunnels were hit too. Natanz fuel enrichment plant also hit again. But, and this seems crucial, Grossi noted, Iran told the IAEA there was no increase in off-site radiation levels at the 3 sites. Why is that piece so important?
Oh, that's incredibly important. Yeah. It basically indicates the strikes, while destructive, didn't cause a major environmental or public health disaster like a big nuclear leak. For monitoring bodies, for the international community, avoiding widespread radioactive contamination is, well, it's a huge concern. So it suggests the strikes damaged the facilities, but maybe didn't breach the core containment in a way that would release significant radioactive material. That's key.
Okay, so we have the immediate damage assessed, but the bigger question is, How effective were these strikes, really? The assessments seem all over the place, don't they? You've got Defense Secretary Hegseth claiming the operation obliterated Iran's nuclear ambitions. President Trump said the same thing, obliterated the sites. But then you have someone like the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dan Kane, saying it's just way too early to know if Iran still has nuclear capabilities. What's that immediate difference in claims tell us, especially with these deep underground sites?
That divergence is really telling, isn't it? It points straight to the difficulty in assessing battle damage, especially with deeply buried stuff. The obliterated claims. Often those are initial, high-level political or military takes meant to project strength, project success. But figures like General Kane, they're speaking more from a technical ground truth perspective. It takes time. We also saw former CIA officer McMulroy offer a more cautious take. He estimated the strikes likely set back the Iranian nuclear weapons program 2 to 5 years. But even he stressed, the full battle damage assessment is needed for accuracy, and he acknowledged that historically, initial assessments often turn out to be overly optimistic.
That makes sense. It takes time to really know. And our sources even show some doubts before the strikes, right, within U.S. official circles. Some officials questioned if one bombing campaign could actually destroy the whole program, especially sites like Isfahan. And one senior U.S. lawmaker apparently quipped about whether Iran might have moved its enriched uranium before the strikes became so publicly discussed, saying, Iranians aren't idiots. That really highlights the complexity, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It speaks to that long-standing intelligence challenge. Knowing exactly what Iran has and where, especially given their history of secret facilities, that Iranians aren't idiots comment that sort of captures the strategic reality, doesn't it? A sophisticated adversary anticipates threats, they adapt, they might move critical stuff. So that just adds another layer of uncertainty to any claims of total obliteration.
Okay, so given all that complexity and uncertainty, how did the world react? Starting domestically, here in the U.S., it seems like a really mixed bag. President Trump, for instance, went on social media attacking Republican Representative Thomas Massie for calling the strikes unconstitutional, called him weak and ineffective. That suggests a pretty strong pushback against dissent from the administration.
It certainly does. And then on the Democratic side, you had Representative Jim Himes calling the strikes a massive gamble. He drew parallels to past U.S. actions in the Middle East, Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, where, initial military success was followed by huge long-term costs, like 4,400 American deaths in Iraq, the Taliban coming back. Himes also sounded disturbed about the lack of congressional approval, really emphasizing Congress's sole authority to declare war. And Senator Bernie Sanders voiced opposition at a rally, too, leading to chants of no more war. This whole constitutional debate flared right up again, didn't it?
Absolutely. That tension between the executive acting militarily and Congress having the power to declare war, it's a constant theme, and it's right here again. Although Vice President J.D. Vance tried to sort of smooth things over, stating the U.S. is not at war with Iran, but, quote, at war with Iran's nuclear program. He emphasized the administration isn't interested in protracted conflicts. That's a fine line they're trying to walk there.
It is a very fine line, aimed at managing perceptions at home and abroad. But internationally, the reactions were just as varied, maybe less subtle. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Zaraki, obviously condemned the attacks outrageous, a very big red line, called for UN condemnation, U.S. accountability. He even flew to Moscow to talk with President Putin. And what's really interesting here is a top aide to Iran's supreme leader, Ali Shamkhani, warned that, quote, the game is not over. He said, the enriched materials, indigenous knowledge, and political will remain intact, and the surprises will continue. That suggests Iran sees its capability as much more than just buildings, doesn't it?
Wow, yeah. That really hammers home the point that destroying a program isn't just about hitting physical sites. It's about knowledge, intent, people. And the international condemnation wasn't just from Iran and Russia. The UN Secretary General, Guterres, said the attack marks a perilous turn and warned against a rat hole of retaliation. China's UN envoy condemned it too, called for a ceasefire, accused the U.S. of violating international law, dealing a heavy blow to non-proliferation efforts. Russia's foreign ministry also strongly condemned them irresponsible, dangerous escalation. Seems like much of the world viewed this as really destabilizing.
They did. And it's notable that even key U.S. allies in the Middle East, the Gulf states like Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, they released statements condemning U.S. involvement too. They urged wisdom and self-restraint, called for diplomacy. Indian Prime Minister Modi also voiced deep concern to Iran's president, stressing de-escalation, dialogue, diplomacy, said India was on the side of peace. So you see this broad international worry about regional stability, even from countries usually aligned with U.S. interests.
But Not everyone condemned it. Israel's UN envoy, Danny Danon, he publicly thanked the U.S. and President Trump, called the strikes a necessary act, a brave decision, removing the greatest threat to global security. He basically said the entire world is safer. So a really clear split in perception there based on national interest, threat assessment.
Exactly, a stark split. And beyond the immediate military and diplomatic fallout, you always have to consider the economic side with events like this. How quickly did markets react? What are the big worries for global trade?
Well, our sources say experts immediately predicted a jump in oil prices. Andy Lipow of Lipow Oil Associates expected oil to open around $80 a barrel. But here's where it gets really critical. The big worry is the Strait of Hormuz, that narrow channel, the choke point connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. Why is that strait just so vital? And what happens if it gets disrupted?
Oh, the Strait of Hormuz is absolutely critical. About 20%, one-fifth of the world's crude oil passes through there. It's a massive bottleneck. Any disruption, even just the threat of disruption, can send huge shockwaves through global energy markets. If it were seriously affected, the sources we looked at suggest oil prices could shoot up to $100 a barrel. And for consumers here in the U.S., that could mean gas and diesel prices jumping by maybe 75 cents a gallon. That kind of sudden energy cost hike could easily reignite inflation, impacting everything from shipping to food prices to manufacturing. So the economic fallout isn't just theoretical. It could have very real, very tangible effects globally.
So, bringing it all together, what does this all mean? We've painted a picture, I think, of a really complex, fast-moving situation. You've got this major military action, then these wildly different views on how effective it was right away, and this whole spectrum of global reactions. You can really see how quickly narratives shift, how different countries, different players interpret the exact same events through their own lens, right, based on their own interests.
It's a perfect example of information being part of the conflict itself, isn't it? We've covered the nuts and bolts, the bombs, the planes, the satellite photos of damage. We've heard those immediate claims of obliteration right alongside much more cautious assessments. Those political worries about constitutional authority, the risks of getting dragged into another long conflict. And internationally, that clear split, condemnation from many, applause from others, and everyone kind of holding their breath about the economy.
Right, so this deep dive hopefully gives you a solid framework, not just for understanding what happened over the weekend, but how it's being seen, how it's being framed, and what those ripple effects might be far beyond the initial explosions. It's a powerful reminder that information, especially when things are happening live, it's always evolving. Getting the full picture means piecing together all these different threads and trying to understand the motives behind them.
Indeed. And thinking about those conflicting assessments of the long-term impact, on Iran's actual nuclear capabilities, and remembering that history of unintended consequences in the region that some officials brought up, it raises a really important question for you, the listener, to think about. How might the definition of success for these strikes actually change over the next few months or even years? Beyond just those initial damage reports, what specific things, metrics, developments should you be watching for to really gauge the true long-term outcome of all